in person. This is the third time that we're doing a group tech investor day. If you recall, our first tech investor day, we talked about a lot why we invest in core technologies of our own and how that's been used for the past 12 years to transform and propel the growth of our core financial services. In the second investor day, we took it one step further. We shared with you why our core technologies are not just being used for our financial services businesses, but also used to drive growth in 5 of our ecosystems. We talked about how we chose the ecosystem. There were a lot of questions about how we grow within each of the ecosystem. And suffice to say that over the past 12 years, we made some progress. We now have 11 tech companies, 3 of which are publicly listed, 2 are unicorns, and we continue to propel that for our next 10 years to grow. Today, in our third Tech Investor Day, we wanted to focus on one of the particular ecosystems in general, in specific, our healthcare ecosystem, which is the most important of the 5. And many people ask, why we looked at the healthcare system, why we made such a big deal out of it. Usually, we really made a big deal out of it. We actually have 12 entities working across the ecosystem. But we believe that it has huge potential, and why this potential cannot be captured by just attacking one specific aspect and cherry pick, that you need a long-term, holistic strategy to penetrate and serve the entire ecosystem. There'll be 3 parts today. I'll share, I think, first the overall group healthcare ecosystem, our thinking behind. For those of you who are less familiar with the China healthcare market, at the request of our dear James, we've also added a section on the healthcare system within China. And then after myself, I'll invite Wei Hao to showing our new CFO, Good Doctor, why we believe that, post actually the COVID situation, it has actually accelerated and increased the potential of what we have started the evolution about 7 years ago in internet healthcare. And he'll share with you our strategy on how we intend to expand that a lot more. And then finally, the third part, I'll invite Jeff and Guo Tong, our CEO for Smart Healthcare, as well as for our group health scientists, to share something a little bit less known to the public, our Smart Healthcare, why we choose to do that, why actually, quietly, we've actually accomplished quite a lot, and it's a very synergistic part of the ecosystem. So let me start off with my section first. I'm going to cover 3 parts. I think one about the market potential, not just as big, because everyone knows that it's big, but why we believe that there's massive potential, and you need to look at it across the entire ecosystem. It's not something that you can just cherry pick and get across, because you need to solve the entire complex issue of the entire ecosystem in order to capture the value. The second part, I'll share with you our entire ecosystem strategy at length. This is the first time ever that we share publicly our group healthcare ecosystem. There's actually 12 entities. Most of you are familiar with PingAn Good Doctor, but I'll try to share with you a little bit why we have made the choices that we made, and the significant synergies within the group, not just across the 12 entities, but it's a core part of our integral insurance proposition. And then thirdly, how actually, if you look at it all, we've actually never shared also our entire kind of healthcare ecosystem statistics. You see that actually we have already become a very significant player in the China healthcare market. First one on market, right? The market is huge. Everyone knows that. We have about 6 trillion yuan of spending in the entire China healthcare ecosystem last year. By any estimates, in the next 10 years or so, it should reach about 16 trillion in 2030. Now, this is very easy to understand because there are certain underlying driving factors underneath. Right? With the increasing aging population, we already have 12.6% of the population that is above 65 years old. If you do the math, you find that actually we have more old people than Japan, which is very well known to have an aging population. Increasing affluence, you see that in many countries, as they become more affluent, people spend disproportionately more on healthcare because they don't want to just treat simple ailments or when they're sick. They get into much more proactive management. And I'll share that with you why Good Doctor is now expanding their spectrum of services. And then finally, this is a core pillar and goal for China. China 2030, healthy, kind of reaching healthy China. This is one of the explicit goals, and there's a lot of work to be done in order to get there. And if you look at some of the comparison, today, an average Chinese spend already $11,200 on China healthcare. Now, of course, U.S. healthcare costs might be a bit high. So anywhere between that number and 7 times, you see a lot more growth potential. Now, being a huge market, why is it that we look at the entire ecosystem? Because this spending, that just shows the demand. There's a lot of demand increasing. But in order to capture that demand, you have to look at where in the ecosystem can you create value, and therefore address your needs. And there's 5 stakeholders in particular that we care a lot about, right? From the government, to the consumers themselves, to the providers, the physicians, and the payers. And I'll share with you why we think these 5 stakeholders are critically important in order to fuel the growth of demand that I talked about just now, as well as what kind of pain points are they facing, and therefore that will shape our strategy of what we need to play in the entire ecosystem. I'll start with the government. All of you know that the government constitute about half of the healthcare expenditure in China. They have, of course, made the 2030 Healthy China aspiration, which is a fantastic aspiration. But the challenge, the task of fulfilling that is very significant. We're talking about a country which has to manage 1 million medical institutions. That is a very difficult number to imagine by any counts. You're talking about them improving the number as well as the quality of the physicians and the medical staff. I'll show you there's a significant shortage in this particular area. And you're talking about, a rapidly revolving pharmaceutical market and company structure, whereby we're moving not just from generic, but then to new drugs development and stuff. And then finally, about chronic disease. If you look at the average lifespan of a Chinese consumer today, the last 10% of their kind of life is actually spent with at least one chronic disease. There are already a few hundred million that I'll show later. And 88% of the deaths in China are actually from chronic disease. These are significant problems that need to be solved. If you look at the provider side, there's no lack of medical institutions in China. I mentioned there's about 1 million of them, but this is very uneven. These two inverted triangles, I'm sure you have seen it in many different ways. This shows why that there is an urgent need is not just to invest in medical institutions. There's no shortage of private medical institutions in China. In fact, if you look at the numbers, there are actually more private medical institutions in China than public ones. But yet they only constitute less than 25% of the flows every year. Within the public institutions, it's even more skewed. We're talking about the top 2,582 Tier 3 hospitals that constitute 23% of the entire volume. So in order to capture the value in the provider space, you have to solve three problems. You have to solve, firstly, is the resources mismatch. Right? This is why investing in a single private institute, the largest chain, you're only talking about a couple of dozens of small hospitals. You have to be able to solve this resource mismatch so that it's much more evenly distributed. But to do that, you also need to solve the second problem, which is the lack of primary care, basic infrastructure and capabilities. Lots of people don't want to go to the kind of community hospitals and the like, even for diseases that can be treated there, because the quality of the healthcare service delivered there is not as good or perceived not as good in the Tier 3 and, hospitals. And finally, you need a data, a single set of data, because right now it's very fragmented. There is no unified way of how you should treat, and the level of service and medication is very different. Now, this is why that for us, a lot of people ask why beyond insurance and good doctor, later on, we'll share with you the smart healthcare. Because for us to deliver good service, healthcare service for our consumers, it's not enough to just provide an insurance or provide an online kind of simple diagnostic service. We need to work hand in hand with the offline network, because this is where the bulk of the health consultation and services are being delivered. And this is why later on, Jeff and Gordon will share with you our smart healthcare solution, which is aimed to capture the opportunity here. The third stakeholders that are important, of course, are the consumers themselves. You're talking about the reason that we put the first number here, which is basically 1 billion of what we call sub-health population. I have no idea how to translate that more appropriately. It's because with the rising affluence, we're not just talking about people who are sick. Chinese consumers are much more concerned also about being proactive about it. And anyone in the healthcare industry would tell you that chronic disease can actually, with better proactive health management, delay the onset as well as better manage that. Right? So people are going to spend a lot more on basically what we call yajiankang sub-health population. We talk about 400 million people with chronic disease, 4 million with critical illnesses, as well as 250 million people above 60 years old. These are segments in the consumers market that direly need better healthcare solutions. Now, in order to do that, you see things that we have to resolve. Not just the provision, as I talked about in the provider space, but also how do you reduce, waiting times, more reasonable costs, right? And also being able to pay for that. This number is an interesting one, whereby we have 60% what we call non-necessary medication rate, right? By some of the journals that you looked at, actually 60% of the medication prescribed are actually supplementary stuff. And it's very hard to control that standard because, like I said, it's being done across 1 million institutes. This is why it's important, later, Wei Hao will share in our PingAn Good Doctor, that in order to resolve this, we started this journey about 7 years ago. But we need to do a lot more. We need to do a lot more in two dimensions, as Wei Hao will explain later. One is that we can't just focus on minor ailments. We have to go into critical illness, which constitute the bulk of the health costs. We also need to go to the other extent, which is on the health management part, and much more proactive, addressing the sub-health part. The fourth stakeholder is on the physicians or the medical team. Right? There's a total of 3.5 million doctors in China. That's woefully not enough for a population of 1.4 billion people. And particularly in general practitioner, right? Typical general practitioner ratio to specialist ratio, we're talking about maybe 3:7. In China, it's more like 1:7. So we have a shortage of at least 700,000 qualified general practitioner. The second shortage is around medical nursing staff, radiologists, etc. This is why we do AI medical imaging that we'll share with you later. Typical ratio, again, is 1:4, right? 1 doctor to about 4 kind of supporting medical staff. In China, it's more like 1:1. So there's at least a shortage of 10 million of such medical support staff, which needs to be trained so that you can provide the level of service that we want to. Besides shortage in the absolute numbers, there's also, it causes problem, therefore, in their quality. They're overworked, underpaid. The medical level of quality, one of the metrics that professionals use is basically the percentage of the treatment there is being standardized as prescribed by the government, that this is how you should actually be treating various illnesses. By many different types of independent studies shows that the current percentage of standardized treatment rate is less than 50%, particularly acute in what we shared earlier, the more basic community level kind of infrastructure, as well as in Tier 2, Tier 3, and 4 cities. This is why later on in our smart healthcare, you'll see why we've actually used our technology to help improve the level of quality across all these medical staff. Because we can't magically create double the number of qualified medical staff, in a short amount of time. That is a long-term gain. But what technology can do is actually help improve the level of service quality across all these physicians and medical staff. And finally, the fifth part, which is really our core business, is on the payer front. Right? And that's, of course, who's going to pay for all these healthcare expenditure. In China, you see that actually 50% of all the healthcare costs is being provided by the government. This is actually very good. For most countries, they may not have that luxury. But what you see are three problems. The first two has been done here. On the social health insurance side, the cost expenditure is increasing at 12%. Whereas if you look at the kind of social health insurance pool, the revenue, if you will, is increasing at 10%. So at one point in time, this will not be sustainable. If you look at the commercial insurance, this is one of the reasons why I'll share our differentiated strategy of doing this. Unlike in some of the more developed, mature markets, where the healthcare services are quite good and affordable with good quality, insurers can just pay, right? But insurers here constitute the entire market, less than 5% of the total market. It does not have sufficient leverage and influence on the provider space to dictate what's the level and the right cost and quality of service that should be delivered to the consumers. This is why we got into healthcare ecosystem. I'll share it later on. And then most importantly, what this ends up being is that actually the out-of-pocket spend of healthcare expenditure for average consumer in China constitute already a significant portion. It's about 10% of the disposable income. Now, 10% may not seem like much, but remember, healthcare cost is actually increasing faster than the average disposable income in China. So that 10% number is going to be increasing a lot more. 10% relative to other countries is also a very high number. Even in the US, whereby everyone knows the healthcare cost is very expensive, the out-of-pocket spend for the average US consumer to their disposable income is only 7%. In Singapore, where I come from, where we have we have one of our kind of Ming, who's also a kind of CEO of the doctor network in Singapore. He's very familiar with that. He's part of our team right now. In Singapore, we have very affordable healthcare expenditure. That percentage of out-of-pocket spend is only 7% of the average disposable income. So 10% is already a very significant number, and that number is going to increase. This is why that you see later on why in the payer market we can't just be play our part as a commercial insurer, which actually has a very small percentage. Everyone knows the rest of the gap is going to come. Commercial insurance has to increase, be it by personal commercial health insurance or paid for by corporates health insurance. But that number is not going to magically increase on its own by us sitting there waiting for it to be captured. That number needs to be captured, like I said, working in conjunction with the social health insurance side. Working with the rest of the providers such that it becomes a much more sustainable kind of bundle of how you pay for this. And we'll share with you later, and this is why we have Health Connect in this particular area. People know that we started Health Connect, which serves basically social health insurance, since about 8 years ago. And that's very important because we first had to help, with the government on how to better manage and set standards for the social health insurance, and then gradually move to different models whereby we combine the social health insurance and the commercial insurance for specific segments, for specific chronic diseases, which is currently being underway. So these are the 5 sets of key stakeholders, and you see that while we have a huge 6 trillion or 16 trillion China healthcare expenditure market, it's very important that you have to look at these 5 stakeholders and how you address these pain points in order to capture the value. We cannot just cherry pick one and say, I'll just do one thing. This is, of course, supported by the whole government, right? Which I think is something that is favorable to us. We're very confident as we propel this. There's 3 recent kind of guidelines which show that this is, a supportive regulatory environment. One is basically, as part of the COVID, has accelerated the Internet plus health care regulations. You see now there are about 400 internet hospitals. For the past 3 years, actually, there were only 2 major provinces that allow online social health insurance reimbursement for internet health hospitals. In just this year alone, it's become 10 provinces. So that's going to continue to accelerate. And we highly will share with you what we're doing in PingAn Good Doctor to try and capture their opportunity. The government is also pushing a lot, like I said, on how to address the misalignment of resources and flows in the 2 inverted triangles that I shared just now. And Guo Cong and Jeff will share with you later what we're doing in order to help accelerate that realignment of resources, at the same time be able to capture the value by providing a technology platform and services to do that. And then finally, on the insurance side, which is our core business, you see recently, just last month, a new kind of policy being released by the regulator, whereby we can now, from the health management cost, increase from 10% to 20%. It's no longer enough to offer just what we call a coal health insurance protection on financial value, but it has to be bundled with a lot of health management and medical services, and that's our differentiating factor. No others invest as much as we do in order to do that service. The second part I wanted to share is therefore what we're doing about our entire ecosystem. Why do we actually need 12 different entities in order to address the pain points across the 5 parts of the ecosystem? we chose healthcare. I said it's very important. It's because if you look at it from a GDP or from a consumer spend, actually healthcare is the next most important one relative to basically financial services and real estate. So for us, amongst the 5 ecosystems, I have to say healthcare is where we spend the most amount of time, and I personally spend a lot of time on. This is also not new to us, although this is the first time we're doing the health kind of investor day. This is something that we've persevered for the past 20 plus years. There have been 3 phases in our group's healthcare ecosystem development. Right? The first phase, 20 years ago, is when we first started into insurance. And if you know the market, we were one of the first ones and still the ones that's very dominant in ensuring a higher percentage of protection, particularly in the health services. The second phase really started about 8 years ago in 2012, whereby we started to not just do insurance protection. This was when we made the next level of integration into the ecosystem, into healthcare services. So you see here, we set up a couple of investment vehicles, like Voyager Fund, like PingAn Ventures. We've made over 100 investments in healthcare services and technology over the past 10 plus years. And then we also set up PingAn Good Doctor and Health Connect, right? It's really providing better services to the patient, the payer front. And then finally, in stage 3 of the development, which really started about 3 years ago, we started to invest a lot more in technology, and I'll share with you later. This is the key of what Jeff and Guotong will share with you. Why we added this third part, which is very important. Whatever you want to say about healthcare, ultimately, even if I have the patients and I have the provider side and the payer front, if I'm not able to control the level of service and the cost of service within the provider, the 1 million institutions that we talked about, and what the 3.5 million doctors are doing, everything else is just a hoax. Right? This is why we carefully, over years of basically perfection, 3 years ago, we formally launched how we use technology to enter the provider space, working in conjunction with the government, such that you can cover it at much more greater scale without heavy investment. So this is how our ecosystem looks like. Right? It may sound very complicated, but really it just has these 5 key components. The patient, provider, and payer front is one that we've shared in the past before. And then the 2 parts that we haven't really talked a lot about is really the government side, which enable access, and also our technology front, which actually provide a differentiated kind of proposition. The 3 sets of synergies I want to talk about at length is really, 1, horizontally. Why this is critical that in order to capture the value, you have to do both patient, provider, and payer. You can't take shortcuts in this area. The second level of synergies we talked about really vertically, from the government to the provider, as well as to technology. Why this vertical strategy, which is what our third part on smart healthcare is all about, is very important. Otherwise, horizontally will take forever or you require huge capital investments. And then thirdly, why, with numbers, healthcare is an integral part to our financial services. I'll show you that, having the healthcare services, even though we have not shared this publicly before, this is the first time we're sharing these numbers, actually those help us acquire customers better. It help us basically increase the share of wallet and retention of customers who have both financial services as well as healthcare services. On the first one, the horizontal synergies. If you look at from the patient, provider, and payer front, if you look at the patient, if I just have the doctor, that's not sufficient. For all the buzz that we talked about in internet, online healthcare, only 3% of all the consultations and visits are done online. Even in the US, where telemedicine has increased, has started much earlier than China, that number is also below 5%. Now, granted, of course, during COVID situation, there has been a rapid rise, but that's an unusual rise. We believe that number should be, of course, more around 30% can be done online. That's where our medical experts have done painstakingly, going through every illness, every part of the treatment process to say which part can actually be done online. So that 3% number should be more like 34% number. But in reality, even if it's 34% number, you cannot get away with just providing one single small part of it. You have to be able to deliver service with the offline network in a much more integrated way, because I can't just send my user or online and say, oh, but by the way, you got to go down, and then it goes in the deep hole again. So this is why just having good doctor is not sufficient. We are the largest healthcare portal right now in China, but that's not sufficient because I can only deliver part of the service myself. I still have to work with the offline network, which then comes off to the second part. So if you have to work the offline network, now of course people, particularly those from other countries, might ask, why can't you just be like other insurer, right? Just partner, have business collaboration with various hospitals in the network. We all have that. We have it. Other insurance companies in China also have it. But that doesn't make any difference. Because unlike, in the US or in other countries, whereby commercial insurance, as I showed you earlier, constitute a significant part of the spend in the hospitals here doesn't listen to you. I'm only constituting less than 5% of your spend. I have absolutely no control over how different diseases should be treated, what should be the right level of cost. Right? This is why now I don't want to go invest in a hospital. Right? As I said, there's no shortage of hospitals, a million of them. Right? More than half are privately held, not public ones. The key is not to invest more. To get into the provider space, we have to find a way, which is through our smart healthcare way that I'll talk about later, in order to work in conjunction with the rest of the network, particularly the public ones. And then finally, on the payer front, it's not sufficient to just do patient and provider. We have to be able to pay for it. And therefore, we have to work in conjunction about social health insurance because this 50% number is not going to magically go away. It's going to be a significant part even for the next 10 years. This is what's at the synergy and the differentiator for us. Why, unlike other insurers, we've chosen to actually go through the whole ecosystem horizontally from patient, provider, and payer. And we started this journey, like I said, even 10 years ago. The second level of synergies is vertically. Okay. To get into provider space, as I said, there's two extreme versions that you see in the market today. There's one version which is, I'm going to heavily invest, either to acquire or build one. But good luck, that's going to take forever. And most of the investments, for those of you who have ever done, hospital investments in China, most of them, don't make much money. So that's really not the approach, heavy capital intensive approach I want to go to. You could go to the other front, like I said, whereby you have partnerships. But given the numbers that you've seen, I'm sure you agree with me that that really is a loose affiliation. It just really means that my health insurance can be accepted here, but I have absolutely no control over the level of service and cost that's being delivered. And therefore, we opted to do the second part. We have to find a way to be able to work together with particularly the public healthcare institutions so that through our technology platform, even though I don't own them explicitly, that I'm able to control the level of service and cost within those institutions. And therefore comes important the government and the technology part. It's just these two parts we have never shared publicly before, even though we've been working at it for a while. The government is an important factor because these are public health institutions. You have to work with the government in order to get into the public health institutions. And as you can see earlier, there's actually a strong desire for the government to actually use our technology capabilities in order to get in. Right? You'll see in our smart healthcare, the third topic later, we're already in 90 cities. Working with the government population, the government to get access, and we now have over 20,000 healthcare institutions, many of our top-tier hospitals, as well as the community one, using our technology to get in to help them resolve the shortage and quality issue. This is why the vertical access is very important. We're not doing this. A lot of tech companies might actually do that to win competition and like that stuff. We make a little bit less noise and media buzz about that because we don't think this is about small fame or a smaller business unit doing that. We see this as a core part in order to unlock the value within the provider space. For us, this is a 10-year plus strategy. The third synergy I want to talk about, because many of the investors, both here in person today as well as online, are also, our core group investors. Why are we doing this? Right? You might be convinced by me that the healthcare ecosystem is a significant opportunity, but one that's very complex. But this is an integral, essential part of our insurance business. Right? For the past 3 to 4 years, every year, you all know a number, that 35% of our new customers every year come from our 576 million ecosystem. Actually, the 35% number is broken down to 15 to 20% and the remaining one. The 15 to 20% of new customers come from our healthcare ecosystem in particular. This is the first time we ever released this number. I'm releasing this number because I want to show you how healthcare amongst our 5 ecosystem is an integral part of our insurance business. We now, 60% of our financial services, 200 million financial services customers, have our healthcare service in one form or another. That translates to 126 million financial services customers who have on average 3.1 financial services products with us, as well as our healthcare ecosystem. Our average financial services customers only have 2.0 products per customer. You see that in our annual release, our half-year release. But for those 60% who has a healthcare service, their average is actually higher, 3.1. The average AUM with us is actually 10,000 versus the average financial services customer with us of 5,600. This is something that is very important. It shows that healthcare service not only help us acquire new financial services customers, it's actually a very important aspect to retain and grow the share of wallet of our financial services customers with us. This is also why, unlike some of the domestic and foreign insurers, we didn't choose to just partner and buy various services, healthcare services from other vendors. We chose to do this ourselves. Because this, for us, is a long-term game. This is not about, me putting my insurance product on an online traffic portal somewhere, somebody else's, and then sell some insurance product. It's not. We ask for our insurance product to be closely integrated with our healthcare services. We see that as an integral part. Internally, we call that we don't want to sell a cold, that's translated, it's not so nice, a cold-hearted type of insurance coverage protection. But one that has service, that has some 场景 scenario, and with service with 温度, with warmth, type of insurance and healthcare services. So this is why we don't see this as a hobby. This is an integral part, of our entire strategy. The third part is actually what we've accomplished. We seldom brag about this numbers, but Sun and James have told us we should share this a little bit more. We've been focused much more on doing. We actually are already a significant healthcare player. Now, of course, it's going to take a while for people to remember, because back 5 years ago when we said we are a tech company, it took us a while before people believe us. So today, I want to share with you why we say we're already a significant leading healthcare player. If you look at across the 5 parts of the ecosystem, on the patient front, we already have 346 million users at Good Doctor. Of course, granted, this is only one part. But like I said, 60% of financial services customers already have some form of health services with us. We are the largest health portal in China, which will become the largest vertical actually in China. I will share that with you later. On the provider front, through Good Doctor and our Smart Healthcare other units, we already now have our own inline medical team of 1,800. It's going to be close to 2,000 and above by the end of the year. Not only that, we work with 10,000 other top specialists within the country. And through our Smart Healthcare, we now cover 20,000 institutions and over 450,000 doctors. That's not a small number. That is roughly about 13-14% of all the doctors that I talked about in the entire market. And on the payer front, you know that we have actually about 200 million customers. 65 million of them actually have health and life coverage, health-related components. We're, of course, the #1 health insurance company. And then with our Health Connect, we now cover over 200 cities on social health insurance. And on the government front, like I said, even though we started only about 3+ years ago, on the government front, we made rapid progress, right? Particularly post-COVID, actually the government is a lot more interested. Jeff will share with you how the government already spends 200 billion yuan a year on public healthcare spending, and they're going to invest 45 billion more on top of that to build new healthcare infrastructure, because that's a very important part, not just for healthy China 2030, but actually post-COVID, it exposes a lot of significant gaps and needs in order to upgrade that. And we're working with the government on that across 13 provinces, 90 cities. And finally, on technology front, the reason I got Guo Tongkam here to share is that, our technology is not to just use fancy kind of competition, which we have our fair share of. We have, I think just this year alone, we should have 6 global health AI competition whereby we have actually global #1. We have more than 40 over publications, globally in Lancet and others, whereby actually our AI scientist's name is actually listed first, which is very difficult to get in the medical journals. So amongst all these 5, we actually have significant numbers if you read these. Already, and this is why I said we are already a significant healthcare player. If you ask what's differentiated, right, we put some little logos here, right? For the traditional insurer, the key between us versus other domestic and foreign insurer is that we don't see this part as just selling more insurance, right? So you see all the red kind of logos, if you will, are areas which traditional insurer will not invest in and have not invested in, whereas we've been investing over the past 12 years. The blue color part is where I think our differentiated strategy is versus some niche health IT player or the internet players. We take this seriously. We're not just here setting up things to sell more non-prescription drugs. We do this as part of the entire ecosystem. We work with the offline. It may be very difficult. It's very tough. Jeff will share with you later. But this is an integral part of the entire strategy. So on all these, I'm going to glimpse through, because a lot of it I've talked about, right? Be it in the government, be it with the patients, not just the number, but the span of the services that we talked about that Wei Hao will share later. With the provider, not just the online part, which now is only 3%, but also, it might grow to 30%, but more importantly, the offline part, how you integrate seamlessly without heavy capital investment. On the payer front, right, the out-of-pocket spend, if you don't remember any number, remember 10% of our discretionary income is already spent on out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure spend. That's higher than the US, it's higher than Singapore, and we need to address that. But also to unlock the commercial insurance potential, you have to work in conjunction with social health insurance. And then on technology front that Guo Tong will share with you, with actually 5 leading databases, how that has been able to translate into core differentiating competitiveness across the entire ecosystem. And this is something we persevere. This is why we are able to do the AI clinical decision support system. Some of you might know that we beat actually even normal physicians, normal general practitioner having only 51 marks in the competition versus those that use our tool at 86 marks. This is why we're able to do that, because we have actually invested significantly letting our AI engine not just learn some competition stuff, but actually looking into 30,000 different diseases and the track record across 10 plus years to develop that engine. So in sum up, it's a little bit long, but I wanted to share very carefully, because there's a very diverse audience out there, the China healthcare market itself. Why it is big? Everyone knows it's big, but it's actually very complex. In order to capture the value, it is not a simple cherry-pick investment and say, I'm just going to do this one thing out of the entire ecosystem. That you have to go penetrate into each of the key stakeholders, particularly the 5 of them, to understand where their pain points are and to be able to provide value in order to capture the growing market. The second part, hopefully I've convinced you why, given such a complex task, this is not a 3-year strategy or whatever. This is something we've been at it for the past 20 years, and that you will see much more these 12 units to do it. Nobody does it with the breadth, the depth, and the longitude in which we look at this entire ecosystem. But this will absolutely pay off in the medium term. And then finally, today we'll glimpse a little bit beyond Good Doctor. One is, of course, Wei Hao will share our Good Doctor on how we think our revised strategy, to capture the next stage of growth in Internet Healthcare 2.0. But also, the other part, which the third topic will be that's less talked about, on the smart healthcare vertical integration of why we think that's important. So thank you. Hopefully that's a good kickoff, right? And I'll invite Sun Zhong first to do the next step. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica, for such a outline. She spent a lot of time to take you through some of the numbers and to illustrate what is our insight to healthcare, specific demands, as well as the pain points across the 5 stakeholders. You're fully aware that in China it's difficult and it's also expensive to have your disease managed. For the last 10, 20 years, there has been an issue that hasn't been really resolved over the last 4 decades. And we have also talked about what efforts we have put in.